My daughter-in-law laughed while holding her drink and said I looked like her maid, right there in my own backyard. I was wearing the same blouse I'd worn the night my husband asked me to marry him. My son just stood there, acting like he didn't hear a word. So, I smiled, walked out without saying anything, and 2 weeks later, I sold the house they were living in. I did something they'd never forget. I hadn't planned on going to that weekend party. Not after how Vanessa had been treating me lately. She'd been making little rude comments, rolling her eyes every time I walked into the room, whispering to Daniel that I was too old to keep up. But Daniel called me. "It's just a few friends, Mom, nothing fancy," he said, though his voice was tight like he was hiding something. So, I decided to go. I ironed my nicest blouse, the one Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary. He always said it made me look bright and elegant. I put on a little blush, pulled my hair back, and told myself it was just a simple get-together. When I got there, the backyard was already full of people. String lights were glowing, and women, in high heels, were holding fancy cocktails. It was exactly the kind of party Vanessa loved. I hadn't even set down my purse when I heard her voice cut through all the talking. "Oh my God, doesn't Maggie look like Consuela, my old maid from Houston?" she yelled. Then she let out this big, fake laugh that made everyone else laugh, too. The sound spread across the yard like a fire. I stood there holding a glass of wine someone had handed me. My face felt hot. I looked over and saw Daniel. He was talking to some man in a golf hat. Our eyes met, and then he looked away. That hurt even more than the insult, my own son pretending he didn't hear. I turned around and slowly walked to the guest bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the toilet lid, my hands shaking. I stared at myself in the mirror. My lipstick was smeared. I looked tired, no more than tired, worn out. I thought, not for the first time, that if Richard were still alive, none of this would be happening. Vanessa hadn't always been this way. When Richard was here, she pretended to be nice, but after he died, she stopped pretending. I used to tell myself that Daniel didn't notice, or that he was too busy to care. But tonight proved it. He saw everything, and did nothing. I splashed water on my face and waited until I heard the voices, drifting toward the front of the house. Then I came out, hoping no one would see me. But Alina, our housekeeper, was standing in the hallway folding napkins. She looked at me not with pity, but like she understood. She didn't say a word, just gave me a little nod. That was when something inside me started to change. It didn't feel like breaking, more like a gear turning into a new place. I wasn't angry yet, but I suddenly knew this house didn't feel like mine anymore. I had cooked Christmas dinners here, raised Daniel in these rooms, brought Richard home after his heart surgery, and now I was being laughed at by a woman who hadn't even been there when my son was a little boy with frosting on his face. Driving home, I didn't cry. I just gripped the wheel and drove in silence. Streetlights flashed across the windshield like little sparks. When I got home, I turned off the engine and just sat there with the keys in my lap. I kept thinking about all the times I had defended Vanessa. "She's just high-strung," I'd tell my friends. "She means well." But sitting there in the dark, I wondered how long I'd been lying to myself, and how long Daniel had been lying to me. I didn't know then that Alina would later bring me something hidden away in a drawer, something that would change everything. That came later. All I knew that night was this. My daughter-in-law looked me right in the eye and called me her maid in front of a yard full of people. And my son looked away. That was the moment I stopped being scared of making a scene. Because the scene had already happened, and they were the ones who started it. I just hadn't decided yet how I was going to finish it. The next morning, I was still wearing the same clothes. I hadn't slept. I poured myself a cup of black coffee at 6 in the morning and stood in the kitchen, staring at the fridge. Richard's old fishing magnet still held up a faded picture of Daniel when he was 12, his face covered in birthday cake. All I could think about was the sound of Vanessa's voice and the way Daniel's eyes dropped to the ground. I kept replaying that awful moment in my head, over and over, like I was punishing myself. I wondered if I had misunderstood, if maybe there was something I didn't hear right, but deep down, I knew exactly what I'd heard. Around 8 in the morning, Alina called. She never called first, she'd always just show up and knock, like she'd done for the past 15 years. So when she asked, "Can I stop by?" I knew something was different. "Of course," I said. 20 minutes later, she was standing in my doorway with a small tote bag, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. She didn't even sit down. She walked straight to the kitchen counter, opened her bag, and pulled out a folded manila envelope. "You need to see this," she said softly. Inside was a stack of papers-printed bank letters, some loan forms, and one document that made my stomach feel like it dropped right onto the floor. It was a second mortgage agreement with my name on it, my signature, only it wasn't my signature. "I found it in the bottom drawer of Daniel's desk last night," Alina said. "He left it open when they went outside. I don't know why I looked. I just felt like something was wrong." I ran my fingers over the fake signature. It looked almost exactly like mine. Someone had practiced copying it. My mouth went dry. "Why would he do this?" I whispered, though deep down I already knew. "Money. It's always money," Elena said. She sighed. "I think Vanessa pushed him. They've been arguing about remodeling the house. She's been saying things like, 'Your mom will be gone soon anyway.'" She paused, her eyes bright with emotion. "Maggie, I wasn't going to say anything, but after last night, after what she did in front of everybody," I nodded, because I couldn't get any words out. It wasn't just about making fun of me anymore. They were planning behind my back. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were trying to speed things up, at least on paper. I felt like I was underwater. "I don't know what to do," I finally said. Elena stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You do know," she said gently. "You just don't want to be the kind of woman who does it. But she's already been that kind of woman to you." I blinked fast because it was the first time anyone had put it that plainly. Elena had always been kind, even when things were tense in the house. She never picked sides, but now, she looked like she was ready to burn the whole place down if it would help me. I picked up the papers and stared at them like they were in another language. "Do you think Richard knew?" I asked. "He always said Daniel was smart but too soft." Elena hesitated. "There's more," she said. She reached into her bag again and pulled out an old envelope with my husband's handwriting on it. My name was written across the front in neat cursive. "I found this behind a book in the den," she said. "I think he meant you to have it." My hands were shaken as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, written in Richard's careful handwriting. It wasn't exactly a letter, it was more like a warning, a journal entry. "I worry Vanessa's ambition is getting into Daniel's bones." He had written, "She's not cruel, she's careful. And I think he's letting her turn him into something he's not. Maggie, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll watch her closely. Don't let her charm make you blind." I held that note like it was a life preserver. He'd seen it all before I ever let myself believe it. He knew exactly what she was. And now, I had proof, real proof, on paper and in my heart, that I wasn't imagining any of this. They had made me feel like I was just an old burden in my own house. They'd smiled at me while they were planning behind my back. But not anymore. "You're right," I said to Elena, my voice steady for the first time in a long while. "I do know what to do, and I'm going to do it." That whole afternoon, I paced around my living room with the envelope in one hand and my coffee, cold and untouched, in the other. Richard's words kept echoing in my head. Don't let charm make you blind. He'd always had a way of seeing right through people. At first it hurt that he hadn't told me all this face to face, but then I realized he hadn't been hiding it to protect himself. He was trying to protect me. He knew I hated confrontation. He must have thought if he put it in writing, I'd read it when I was finally ready. Well, I was ready now. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, so I walked over to the hall closet and pulled out the metal lockbox where we kept all the important papers, the will, the house deed, insurance documents. I hadn't touched it since Richard's funeral. The key was still on the same ring as my church fob. When I opened it, it smelled like old paper and dust. I pulled out the folder labeled Trust and Will and flipped through it, and there it was, plain as day. Richard had left everything to me. Full ownership of the house, total control of all the accounts. There wasn't a single line that left anything to Daniel or Vanessa while I was alive. I sat down and spread all the pages across the coffee table. For years, I had believed Daniel was helping me, advising me, managing things because he cared. But now, I finally saw the truth. I finally saw it all so clearly. Daniel hadn't been helping me manage anything. He'd been slowly taking control, one quiet signature at a time. That forged mortgage document, it wasn't some last-minute act of desperation. They had planned it. My chest felt tight as I reached for the last envelope in the box. I'd forgotten it was even there. Small brown package Richard had marked private. I opened it slowly, expecting more legal paperwork, but instead, there was Richard's old leather journal, the one he used to write in at night when he couldn't sleep. He always said it helped him clear his head. I flipped to the last few pages, my hand shaking. The first entries were the usual notes about the stock market, complaints about his back hurting, his frustration when Daniel quit his job to start consulting with Vanessa's brother. Then I read something that made my stomach twist. Vanessa wants Daniel to accelerate the future. He'd written, she doesn't say it outright, but I know what she means. They want control. They're waiting for me to die and for Maggie to give up. I wish I'd handled the trust differently. I thought leaving everything to Maggie would protect her. But now I worry it made her a target. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest like it was a shield. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't me overthinking. It was real. They were coming for everything: my house, the money Richard spent 40 years working for, the life we built. I stood up and opened my laptop. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I typed in the name of the lawyer Richard used for the will, Stanley DeMarco. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but his number was still in my contacts. I picked up the phone and dialed. When his assistant answered, I kept my voice steady. Please tell Mr. DeMarco this is Margaret Whitmore. I need to schedule a private meeting as soon as possible. No family present. The assistant hesitated, but then said he could see me tomorrow at 10 a.m. Perfect, I said, and hung up the phone. And for the first time in months, I felt clear, not angry, not heartbroken, just clear. Like Richard was standing right there beside me, helping me see what he'd tried to prepare me for all along. He had known what Vanessa was. And he'd known that Daniel, my own son, who I loved so much, was too weak to stop her. But I could and I would. I wasn't going to yell or argue or cry. I was going to use the same tools they tried to use against me: facts, papers, the law. I had more power than they ever guessed, and they were about to learn exactly how much. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time it wasn't because I was confused or sad. It was because I was planning. I spread every single document across the dining table like pieces on a chessboard: Richard's will, the house deed, the forged mortgage, his journal, even the envelope Elena had found. I practiced what I would say to Daniel, not because I thought he'd admit everything or apologize, but because I wanted to see his face when he realized I knew. The next morning, I dressed with purpose. I wore slacks, flats, and that dark navy blouse Richard always said made me look like I ran the school board. I wanted to look exactly how I felt, like someone in charge. Just after noon, I drove to their house and rang the bell without warning. Vanessa answered the door in yoga pants and too much makeup, clearly irritated. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "You should have called first, Maggie." I cut her off. "I need to speak with both of you, right now." Something in my voice must have startled her, because she didn't have a comeback. She called for Daniel, and the two of them sat across from me at the kitchen island, looking like teenagers waiting to get caught. I took my time pulling out the stack of papers. One by one, I laid them down on the counter. "This," I said, tapping the forged mortgage, "has my signature, except I never signed it." Daniel's face went pale. Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest. "You're mistaken," she said. Her voice, too quick, too sharp. I turned to Daniel. "Look me in the eyes and tell me this is my signature." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "How did you get that?" he finally asked, his voice low. "Does it matter?" I said, "You committed fraud. You borrowed against a house that doesn't even belong to you." I slid the deed across the counter. "I own this house. Legally. Fully. Your father made sure of it." Vanessa scoffed. "We've lived here for years. You think you're just going to kick us out over some paperwork?" Her arrogance almost made me laugh. "It's not some paperwork," I said, calm as ever. "It's proof. And I'm giving you one chance to be honest with me. Tell me what else you've done. Tell me everything. And maybe I won't press charges." Daniel looked like he was about to cry. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes darted around the kitchen like he was looking for an escape hatch. It was just to cover the remodel," he mumbled. "We were going to pay it back." I laughed, short and sharp. "You forged your own mother's name. That's not a loan, that's stealing." Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're being dramatic. It's not like we tried to kill you. You're still alive, aren't you?" That did it. I stood up. "You're right. I am alive, and I plan to stay that way." which is why, as of today, I've removed Daniel as my financial power of attorney. I let that sink in before I kept going. I already filed the paperwork this morning. All access to the joint accounts is frozen. The house is being listed for sale this week. You'll get official notice in the next 2 days. Vanessa stood too, her face bright red. You can't do that. You're punishing your own son, your family, for one mistake. No, I said as I calmly gathered up my papers. I'm fixing a mistake I made when I let either of you feel entitled to something that was never yours. Daniel tried, one last time. Mom, please, can we just talk privately? Vanessa didn't mean it. We got overwhelmed. I looked right at him, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw a man who had let his wife treat me like dirt while he stood by and did nothing. I thought about all the times I'd stayed up with him when he was sick. All the school concerts where I clapped louder than anyone. And now he was sitting there begging for a secret conversation after he'd tried to steal from me. I'm done talking privately, I said. If I've learned one thing, it's that secrets are how people like you to operate. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being polite. You have 30 days. After that, you're out. I turned and walked to the door. Vanessa hissed behind me. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a bitter old woman. I put my hand on the doorknob and looked back at her. Better bitter than blind. Then I stepped out into the sunlight. My heart was racing, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's mother or someone's burden. I felt like someone with power, and I was just getting started. 3 days went by before I heard anything from them, and it wasn't an apology or a lawyer's letter. It was a voicemail, Vanessa screaming so loud it crackled. I played the message twice. The first time, I listened to her words. The second time, I just listened to her voice, because nothing shows a person's true colors like how they act when they lose control. You can't just kick us out, she shrieked. We've built our lives here. Daniel's kids grew up in this house. You're destroying your own family for what? Pride. You're disgusting. I didn't call her back. I saved the recording and emailed it to my lawyer. That same afternoon, I went to the house with a real estate agent named Marcy. She was the kind of woman who looked like she didn't put up with nonsense. She smelled like citrus and fresh ink. As we walked through the rooms, I noticed Vanessa had tried to make everything look messy on purpose. There were clothes tossed on the guest bed, shoes in the hallway, and a wine glass sitting right on the stairs, all staged to make the place look terrible. I ignored it. Marcy took notes and pointed out the crown molding. Richard installed back in '92. We talked about the listing price. Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded, watching us like an angry gargoyle. You're pathetic, she said, loudly, so I'd hear. I didn't even blink. I signed the listing paperwork right there in the kitchen and scheduled a cleaning service for the weekend. That was when Vanessa finally cracked. She stomped down the stairs like a child throwing a tantrum, snatched up the wine glass, and hurled it at the wall. It didn't even break, it bounced off and rolled under the table. It was almost funny, like a scene out of a cheap soap opera. This is our house now, she screamed. You're not the queen here anymore. Daniel came in behind her. He looked like he hadn't shaved or slept in days. Mom, can we just talk? He pleaded, using that soft voice he always used when he was 10 and trying to get out of trouble. I shook my head. You forged my name. You tried to steal my home. There's nothing left to talk about. Vanessa stormed into the living room, yanking open drawers like she was looking for something to throw. I swear to God, she screamed, I'll tell everyone you've lost your mind. You don't even remember things right anymore. I pulled a folded paper from my bag and held it up. My new medical evaluation, I said, from a private doctor, done 2 days ago at my lawyer's request. Certified mentally competent. Signed and sealed. She went quiet, just for a moment. She looked stunned. Then she lunged forward, jabbing her finger at me. This is elder abuse, she yelled. You're abusing us. I almost laughed. You mean by holding you accountable? I turned to Daniel. Your father trusted you. He trusted me. And look what you've done with that trust. He opened his mouth like he wanted to defend himself, but no words came out. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was the sound of a grown man, realizing he'd finally pushed his mother too far. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The listing goes live in 48 hours. You'll get your official eviction notice on Monday. I suggest you start packing, I said. Vanessa muttered something as I walked out, something about calling her brother, about lawyers, about making sure everyone knew what a terrible person I was, but I didn't stop to listen. I got in my car, drove around the block, and parked behind the old Walgreens where Richard and I used to sneak sodas after church. I just sat there for a while with the windows cracked, letting the breeze move through the car. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt steady, solid, like I finally had roots under my feet again. And in that moment, I realized something important. Power doesn't come from yelling the loudest or acting like a victim. It comes from truth, from being ready, and from knowing exactly what you deserve and refusing to accept anything less. Vanessa had made a big mistake. She thought I was just an old woman, stuck in my memories, too tired to stand up for myself. She didn't know I had saved every receipt, every will, revision, every voicemail. She didn't know that I'd been quiet not because I was scared but because I was paying attention. She'd turned herself into the enemy of a woman with nothing left to lose. And that, I knew, was a very dangerous place for her to stand. The morning after Vanessa's little meltdown, I woke up before sunrise. I brewed a cup of Earl Grey and sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. It was time to map out everything I still needed to do before I pulled the final lever. I wasn't just trying to win. I was making sure they couldn't crawl back after I did. First on the list was the bank. I'd already frozen the joint accounts, but now I closed them completely. I had everything moved into a trust in my name, managed by someone with no ties to Daniel. I didn't trust anyone who might feel sorry for him. The banker, a young woman named Kelsey, looked stunned as she flipped through the paperwork. "Your son forged this?" she asked, eyes wide. I didn't flinch. "My attorney will be in touch if the bank doesn't flag the fraud," I said, folding the file neatly. "Thank you for your help." Next was the locks. I'd already called a locksmith the day before, but I rescheduled him for Saturday morning, the same day Vanessa had booked her big charity brunch. I'd seen the caterer's website. She'd reserved the patio, the garden, even hired a champagne truck. She must have assumed I wouldn't dare act before her little event. That was her first mistake. I confirmed with the sheriff's department that the eviction notice would be hand-delivered Monday morning. I called Stanley, the lawyer, to triple-check that every signature was verified and airtight. Once everything was in motion, I went back to the house alone one last time. I walked through every room with my notebook, taking stock of what was mine, what was left behind, and what they'd damaged. The antique table in the foyer was scratched, probably from someone dragging bags across it. The fireplace mantel was chipped. The spice rack Richard had built was smeared with grease. But none of that really hurt me anymore. It only made the decision feel even more right. They hadn't respected the home, or the history, or the hands that built it. They treated it like a backdrop for their Instagram photos. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom and saw our wedding photo still sitting on the dresser, the frame slightly crooked. I walked over and straightened it. That room used to feel so warm. Richard, humming while he brushed his teeth, old records playing on Sunday mornings. Now it felt cold, like a hotel that had been stayed in too long. I walked back to the hall closet and picked up the last folder of financial papers. I slipped them into my tote and checked the alarm system. I'd already changed the password and made sure to delete Daniel's and Vanessa's access codes. That evening, I met Alina for dinner at a little Mexican restaurant off 5th Street. She showed up wearing lipstick and a denim jacket I'd never seen her in before. "You look like you just fired half the world," she teased as we sat down. "I might have," I said, smirking. I told her everything about the lawyer, the bank, the locksmith, and Vanessa's brunch party. She laughed out loud when I told her the locks were getting changed right in the middle of it. "You're cold," she said, raising her margarita. "No," I said, feeling the truth of it down to my bones. "I'm finally warm." She leaned in and smiled. "You want me there on Saturday?" I paused, thinking. "I won't stop you," I said. Her grin widened. "I'll bring my camera." That night, back home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like I was standing in my own life again. And this time, no one was going to take it from me. I wrote one last documenta letter to Daniel, not to Vanessa, not to argue or pick a fight. Just to finally say, in plain words, why I was doing all of this. I told him how I'd sat through years of little insults, how I let his wife chip away at me, hoping he'd step in. I explained that when I found out my own son had forged my name, something inside me broke, and it wasn't going to be fixed. I reminded him about the home we built together, the meals we shared, all those years I poured my heart into raising him, and at the end, I kept it simple. I don't need your permission to protect myself, and you don't have mine to keep using my silence as your shield. I signed it, sealed it in an envelope with no return address, no little note begging him to understand. That night, I slept harder than I had in months, because for the first time, I knew exactly what was coming next and it would happen on my terms. Saturday felt like the final drumbeat, steady, sure, unstoppable. By 9 a.m., I was already out the door in a clean blazer, with 2 copies of the sale agreement in my bag and a fresh coat of lipstick I hadn't worn since Richard's funeral. I got to the house before the champagne truck did. Just like we planned, the locksmith was waiting at the curb, tools in hand, and a curious look on his face. I didn't need to explain much. Everything that matters is already gone, I told him, pointing at the front door. He nodded and started working, one lock at a time, removing Daniel and Vanessa's access to the house they thought they'd taken over. By the time he was finishing up, guests were already showing up, early birds with big fake smiles, holding bottles of bubbly and gift bags. They had no idea the woman they came to flatter wouldn't even be able to let them inside. I stayed in my car for a while, watching Vanessa glide around in her rented floral dress, waving to the photographers like she was about to announce her run for Congress. Then, for just a second, her eyes met mine across the lawn. I smiled. She didn't know yet, but she was about to. I waited until the champagne truck driver walked up to the locked door, scratching his head and calling for her. Vanessa rushed over, her heels sinking into the grass, her voice pinched and brittle as she tried to keep it together. "It's jammed, I swear it's jammed," she said, looking around, trying to sound calm while people started whispering. That's when I stepped out of my car, slowly, like a teacher walking into a noisy classroom. All the chatter died down. Everyone turned to look. "It's not jammed," I said, loud and clear so nobody could pretend they didn't hear. "It's been changed." Vanessa's face went blank. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, storming over and trying to block me from everyone's view. "I'm hosting the final farewell," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "As of yesterday, this property has been sold. The new owners take possession next month. So I'd suggest everyone grab a drink while you still can. It'll be the last one served on this patio." A ripple moved through the crowd, confusion, then awkward laughter, then uncomfortable silence. Daniel came around the side of the house, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said quietly, "please stop. You don't have to do this here." I turned to him, calm as I'd ever been. "Actually, I do. Because every time I tried to do it privately, you ignored me. Every time I spoke softly, you let her shout me down. So now I'm speaking her language." I handed him the envelope. "Inside, you'll find copies of the sale, the eviction notice, and the forged mortgage agreement. And don't worry, haven't pressed charges yet." Vanessa lunged like she was going to rip the papers out of my hands, but her stepped out from the crowd right then, holding up her phone and recording. "Smile, Vanessa," she said sweetly. "Wouldn't want your donors to miss this part." Vanessa froze, suddenly realizing how many phones were pointed her way, how many people were whispering and backing away. "You vindictive old bitch," she spat at me. "You think you've won. Everyone here sees what kind of monster you are." I looked around. Most of the guests were grabbing their purses, quietly apologizing to me, and heading to their cars. Even the champagne truck driver was standing awkwardly by the gate, unsure what to do. "Guess that's my cue," I said, turning to Elena. "You ready?" "Always," Elena said, linking her arm through mine. We walked together down the path, past the people who used to laugh at me right there in that backyard, past the house where I raised a boy who forgot who built his world, past the woman who thought she could tear me down without paying the price. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned around one last time. I saw Vanessa slumped in a patio chair, her mascara running all over her face. Daniel was standing over her, holding the envelope, looking like guilt itself. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just kept walking because I knew this wasn't the end of a party, it was the start of my piece. And the best part, I wasn't even done yet. The eviction notice hit their doorstep first thing Monday morning, at exactly 7:42 a.m. A sheriff's deputy delivered it himself, wearing mirrored sunglasses, and speaking in a flat, no-nonsense voice that even Vanessa couldn't twist into something dramatic. I wasn't there to see it, but Elena was. She parked 2 houses down with a muffin and a cup of coffee. Later, she told me, the way Vanessa screamed, you'd think someone stole her kidney. Daniel didn't yell, he just stood there in sweatpants, took the envelope, nodded like a man who finally understood this was real, and closed the door without a word. By Thursday, a moving truck arrived. Only one, not the 3 Vanessa used to brag about needing for all her designer furniture. By Saturday, they were gone. No farewell note, no apology, not even a text from Daniel. They moved into a rental across town on a cul-de-sac half the size of the place they tried to claim as their own. I only knew that because a woman from my old church group happened to live on the same street. She yelled at the movers the whole time. The woman told me in a hushed voice like she was sharing gossip about the mayor, and he just sat on the curb smoking. I didn't say anything back. There wasn't anything left to say. It was over. The house sat empty for 2 weeks while they finished the last inspections. During that time, I walked through it alone one last time. I moved slowly, like I was visiting an old friend in the hospital before saying goodbye. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and a little bit of regret. I ran my fingers along the edge of the fireplace. I touched the groove in the stair rail where Daniel used to slide down in his pajamas. I looked at the patch of wall in the hallway, where Richard hung our wedding photo crooked and insisted it looked more romantic that way. I sat in the living room, now stripped bare of furniture, and just listened to my own breathing echo off the walls. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I felt clean. 2 days later, the sale closed. The new owners were a young black couple named Marcus and Shelby Foster. They had a tiny baby and a sweet rescue dog. He worked as an electrician, and she worked from home doing graphic design. They'd written me a letter when they made their offer, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "We've dreamed of a house like this," Shelby wrote. Not just the space, but the feeling. That one sentence was enough for me to choose them. They didn't want the house for bragging rights or shows. They wanted it to build a real life in which. I met them at the signing. I shook their hands and set the keys in a little glass bowl by the door. "You'll love the kitchen in the spring," I told Shelby. "It gets the morning light all the way to the sink." She smiled and squeezed my hand, like we were passing a torch. That night, I drove back to my New Plaza small condo near the library. I could walk to the bakery and the community garden. It didn't have a fireplace, or a guest wing, or fancy crown molding from the 80s, but it had quiet, it had freedom, and it was mine. I unpacked slowly, lit a candle Richard had bought me at a Christmas market, and finally opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something. Maybe for exactly this moment. Alina came by around 8 with takeout and a bottle of soda. We sat on my little balcony watching the city hum below. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but proud. "You didn't just win. You freed yourself." I nodded, staring up at the stars. "I didn't know how heavy it all was until I let it go," I said. "I kept trying to carry that house, that family, like it was still what it used to be, but it's not, and I'm not either." She raised her cup, "to never letting anyone treat us like the help again." I laughed, then stopped, remembering that first moment at the party, the insult that had started it all. The way Vanessa's words stung and stuck to me. "You look like my maid," she'd sneered. Funny thing was, the woman she tried to compare me to Elena turned out to be more of a real family than either of them ever were. And in the end, it wasn't the title that mattered. It was the truth. And I had it all, now documented, signed, sealed, and delivered. 2 weeks after the Fosters moved in, I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years, smiling for no reason at all. I hadn't done it in over a decade. Range my bookshelves. Not because I had to, but because I finally had the energy to care about where things belonged again. I was halfway through alphabetizing the fiction when Elena showed up at my door, grinning wide, holding a bottle of mid-shelf red wine and a manila folder tucked under her arm. "Got something to show you," she said, stepping inside like she owned the place. And honestly, by that point, she kind of did. She set the wine on the counter, opened the folder, and slid a glossy document across to Mia's small business license in her name. Elena's Home, Harmony Cleaning, and Organization Services. I blinked, then burst out laughing. "You went legit?" I asked. Her grin got even bigger. "Not just legit. I've got 5 regular clients already, 1 part-time girl I'm training, and 2 referrals waiting in my inbox." Turns out people are happy to pay for what I've been doing for scraps. For years, I picked up the license and felt how solid it was in my hands. You used to say you'd never work for yourself, I said. You told me you didn't even know how. She nodded, her expression softening. I didn't. Not until I watched you burn your whole life down and start over with your head held high. You reminded me I'm not just someone in the background. I'm the reason some of those places even run. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. You're the reason I didn't fall apart, I told her. You pulled me out of the fog when I didn't even know I was in one. She sipped her wine, then leaned in slightly. You know, Vanessa tried to call me twice, left a voicemail like nothing ever happened, said she wanted to make peace and maybe talk about future opportunities. My eyebrows shot up. You're kidding. Elena shook her head. She must have thought I'd feel bad, that I'd be desperate. She didn't understand once you learn your worth, you don't go backward to sit at a rotted table. I laughed harder than I had in months, a full, belly-deep laugh that felt like an exhale. Elena raised her glass again. To self-employment. To boundaries, I added. To dignity, she said. To silence broken, I finished. We clinked our glasses. It wasn't just a toast, it felt like a little ceremony, a release. Later that night, after she'd left and the dishes were washed, I sat alone on my balcony and thought about how strange it was that the person who'd stayed by my side wasn't blood, wasn't someone I'd raised. It was someone I once paid to mop my floors. And yet, she was the only one who ever really saw me, who never asked me to shrink or disappear or be grateful just for being tolerated. Elena had built a new business, but more than that, she'd built herself a new spine, and watching her made me want more, to not revenge, not chaos, just a life that felt like mine. I pulled out my notebook, the one I used to keep grocery lists in on, started a fresh page. At the top, I wrote one word, next. Underneath, I listed 3 things: join the local book club, visit the art museum downtown that I always said I'd see, sign up for those watercolor classes Richard used to tease me about. He once said I'd be dangerous if I ever stopped putting everyone else first. And maybe now I was, not in a cruel way, but in a firm, quiet, deliberate way. Elena was right. Once you see your own worth, there's no going back. And I wasn't going to. I wrote the letter on a Thursday afternoon, with the windows open and the sound of someone's wind chimes clinking softly outside like a long exhale. It wasn't for Daniel and definitely not for Vanessa. I'd already said everything I needed to say to them, in my silence and my signatures. No, this letter was for my grandchildren, Leah and Thomas. 2 sweet Sharpet kids who didn't ask to be born into any of this, who hugged me the last time they saw me without hesitation or judgment. I'd waited to write it until the noise settled and my thoughts stopped spinning. I didn't want it to come from anger. I wanted it to come from truth. I told them about the house, about how it wasn't just walls and rooms, it was memories. The chipped tile where their dad once threw a basketball indoors and broke the lamp. The kitchen drawer that stuck because I kept extra batteries in it like a superstition. The garden where their grandfather grew the world's most stubborn tomatoes. I told them it was okay to feel confused, or hurt, or even mad at me. I said that if their parents ever tried to claim the house was stolen, it wouldn't be true. But I didn't ask them to take sides. I asked them only to remember that love doesn't disappear just because people fail at showing it. I tucked in 2 photos, one of me and Richard on the porch in 1989, and one from Leah's last birthday party, the one where she wore a paper crown and made me pinky promise I'd never forget extra sprinkles next time. I told them they could come visit me anytime, no pressure, no tests of loyalty, just an open door, cookies in the jar, and a woman who still knew how to play Go Fish. When I sealed the envelope, it felt like closing a chapter with both hands steady. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tender, peaceful, like I'd finally closed a chapter without having to slam it shut. That weekend, I donated the last of Richard's books to the local library. Then, I took myself to a community watercolor class. I wasn't good, not yet, but there was something freeing about watching colors bleed into each other without rules or outlines, just motion and instinct. That night, I made spaghetti for one. I lit a candle, read a mystery novel in bed with the windows cracked open and a cup of mint tea on my nightstand. No texts, no drama, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just quiet, just me. Elena texted me a photo of her new business cards and a screenshot of a 5-star review from a client. She saved my house and my sanity, the woman wrote. I texted back, she does that. I thought of Vanessa sometimes, but not for long, usually only in moments when the silence was heavy and old memories crept in. I didn't hate her, I pitied her, because a woman who builds her whole life on control and appearances never really feels safe, even when she wins. And Daniel wished him peace. I hoped he'd grow a backbone one day. Maybe he'd figure out what it really meant to be a son. But that wasn't my job anymore. My job was done. I had protected what mattered. I had reclaimed what was mine. And, more importantly, I'd built something new, not out of spite or bitterness, but from the solid ground of knowing who I was, even when others tried to bury it. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed that night, the room warm, quiet, and full of small, ordinary joy, I whispered into the dark, "I'm home." And for the first time, in a very long time, I meant it.